This would be the last day of a Roman prisoner that was scheduled to fight and die that same day in the Colosseum in front of thousands of people. The experience itself would be terrifying, ritualized and very public. Here's how that day would unfold. Going back to the night before, the prisoner's last night alive, knowing very well the next morning, the process would start quickly. The condemned prisoner, who had been sentenced to the beast or the sword, would be held in the hypogeum. This would be the vast underground network of the Roman Colosseum's tunnels and chambers beneath the area of the floor. The stench must have been unbearable, iron from the blood in the air, feces from humans and animals, with urine mixed in. They would hear the roar of the crowd start to get louder and louder, the snarling of the cage animals nearby, dead animals and people being drug off from the day before, from that day that had died in battle. But when the morning rises, the games begin with a grand procession. Prisoners were often given a last meal. Roman sources suggest this was sometimes a genuine final meal. It was an act that the Romans framed as mercy. They may have been offered a chance to write final words or say prayers, though this depended heavily on their situation, of their crime, or just being at the wrong place at the wrong time. But as the morning would start and the Colosseum would start to open, the sun would hit the Roman hills, and the city, already moving and awake. Thousands of Romans had slept outside the Colosseum the night before, wrapped in cloaks on the stone steps, excited and unwilling to lose their place. Street vendors arrive in the dark, setting up on location to sell trinkets and food, bread, olives, and cheap wine. But inside the hypogeum is where we find the same prisoners every day for hundreds of years now, going through the same emotions, the same worries, one after another, that they are about to die excruciating death. It won't be quick. Blood loss, stabbed to death, having their face mauled off, burnt to death, shot with an arrow, blinded, drowning. Really, that could have been a lot of the fear, not knowing exactly how you were going to die, but just hoping and praying that it would at least be fast. The workers inside the hypogeum never stop. It's 24/7. Slaves and workers move through the torchlight corridors, loading caged animals onto lifts, dragging equipment where it needs to be positioned, raking sand, sharpening weapons. Keeping the Colosseum moving every day for hundreds of years was as much as a feat of the engineering of building it. It's the mechanics that went inside of it. But as light breaks over the dawn, trumpets start, people rush to their seat. Thousands, from the rich to the poor to the middle, 50,000 to 80,000 people, just in under 20 minutes, are filled throughout the Colosseum and ready to be entertained. Now this is hard to believe, but the Colosseum ran every day, from dusk till dawn, 10 to 12 hours a day, constant entertainment. But the day was usually broken up into 3 parts. In the mornings, it would be the animal hunts. The workers would bring out exotic animals, the beast as they called them, lions, elephants, giraffes, and even bears. They were displayed, made to fight each other, but usually when an animal was brought out into the Colosseum, on the ground floor, it wouldn't walk back out. In the middle of the day was a time for public executions, where condemned criminals were put to death, whether they were made to fight a gladiator, an animal. Either way, just like the animals, they would never walk away from the Colosseum. They would be put to death no matter what. They would be lit on fire, shot with arrows, or their heads cut off, or fed to lions. And the afternoon was held for gladiator combat. This was the main attraction, which drew large crowds, lasting right before the nightfall. But the midday point, this was usually when a slave met his demise. If a slave was lucky enough to make it through midday, that afternoon when the gladiators had combat, they would be put in the background, easy targets for the heroic gladiators. But in this too, there were different kinds of slaves, peasant slaves, criminal slaves, but slaves too that were forced to have hand-to-hand combat. But the unique slave was the gladiator. They were also slaves, but trained in warfare, how to fight with their bare hands and weapons. Some slaves had it better than others. You could have been a slave that had no training in fighting, and essentially Your life was worthless. You couldn't even entertain the crowd with fighting. The only entertainment you would bring the crowd was how much of a spectacle your death would be. Some slaves were lucky enough to be workers of the Colosseum, forever how long they would make it, cleaning up the dead bodies. Now once a regular slave would die, or a gladiator, the Colosseum workers would come out after each match, which were called the ferrymen of the underworld. They would check the bodies to confirm they were dead. Some slaves would act dead, so maybe, some way, they could escape the arena to their freedom. The ferrymen, if they found anyone alive or begging for life, they would strike them using a mallet or a hot iron, because it was practical, but also, at the same time, theatrical. The crowd loved it. It was just more entertainment for death. The ferrymen themselves were an element all on their own. The crowd loved them. The ferrymen had to be ruthless. They had to show no love for life, human or animal. They needed to enjoy their job of killing, no matter the begs and screams of pain they heard. It was a show after the show, making a spectacle of the last moments of a slave's life. Bodies were dragged out of what was called the Gate of Death. It was on the arena's western side. This was done quickly between bouts to keep the spectacles moving. After bodies, carriages, weapons, anything miscellaneous on the grounds was removed, then more slaves would be brought out to rake the sand, to clean up the blood, absorb any evidence that was there before, to start fresh for the new fights. What happened to the bodies with the gladiators? For gladiators, their bodies were treated with a little more respect, as they were the main attraction for the Colosseum than just an ordinary slave. Gladiators that had fought more than a few bouts received proper burials, funded by the gladiator school. Some were even given tombstones, especially the gladiators that were of high value. The condemned slaves and criminals received far less respect. The bodies of the slaves were dumped in mass graves, pits outside of the city, and fed to the animals that were coming and going to be more entertainment for the crowd in the Colosseum. And we do know from a little bit of history that some bodies of the dead were bought back by families so they would be given a proper burial. But before all the slaves were taken out to be dumped, their bodies were stripped of any kind of jewelry that had been missed before, and especially any weapons or armor that they were holding or carrying to be used again. It's safe to say that being a slave back in the Roman days, or a criminal, a gladiator, either way, it wasn't good. Death could find you any day, at any time of the day. By any means, it could find you. The death of a slave.